Picture this. You're standing in the legendary National Gallery in London.
Oh, right, the art museum.
Yeah, exactly. And you're looking at that really famous, kind of terrifying painting of Perseus holding up the severed head of Medusa.
That is such a striking image.
It really is. And, according to the old Greek myth, you know exactly what happens if you look into those eyes. I mean, it's instant calcification.
Right, you just turn straight to stone.
Exactly. Like if you're a warrior mid-strike, your javelin is frozen in your fist forever.
Ugh.
Or if you were an assassin sneaking through the shadows, you were turned to solid rock mid-creep.
Yeah, completely frozen in time.
Right. So whenever your exact moral posture was, whatever your internal character was in that precise fraction of a second, it is locked into stone. It's immovable, unchangeable, permanent.
It is one of the most haunting metaphors for human mortality I think I have ever encountered.
Honestly, same here.
And what makes it so unnerving is that it isn't just, ancient mythology. It is a really precise, surgical illustration of the spiritual mechanics of death.
Well, welcome to Reformed Thinking. You brought this incredible source document to us today, a manuscript from May 13th, 1855.
Yeah, it was delivered at Exeter Hall by Charles Spurgeon, unpacking 1 Corinthians 15.56 and 57.
And when you asked us to look into this, I don't think either of us fully grasped the sheer weight of what we were about to dive into.
No, it's incredibly heavy material.
It really is. We're taking a deep dive into the absolute darkest, most universally terrifying subject imaginable, which is the inescapable reality of the grave.
The one thing we all have in common, right?
Exactly. And, okay, let's unpack this. The text doesn't just offer a polite, sentimental pep talk about the afterlife.
Not at all. There is no sugarcoating here.
Right. It takes that Medusa effect, that literal freezing of human character, and uses it to explain the exact microscopic legal mechanics of divine justice, human guilt, and ultimately an unshakable, defiant triumph.
What's fascinating here is the absolute refusal to compromise with modern sensibilities. I mean, the theological synthesis at work in this 1855 document is staggering because it treats you as a thinker.
Yeah, it doesn't talk down to you at all.
Exactly. It assumes you understand the basics of sin and redemption, but it demands you look under the hood at how the engine actually works.
Right. It wants to show you the gears turning.
It connects the absolute inevitability of our physical death with the unyielding adamantine scales of cosmic justice. It builds this airtight legal framework.
And that framework explains precisely why death is so terrifying, like what actually gives it its venom.
Yes, and then purely through the mechanics of substitutionary law, it shows how that power is permanently dismantled.
Right. And since you've been grappling with these profound theological questions, the listener, this deep dive is designed specifically for you.
We really want to bring you into this conversation.
Exactly. We're going to strip away the drywall, the cheap paints, the toxic positivity that our modern culture tries to slap over the reality of the tomb.
Yeah, we are so desperate to avoid the reality of it.
We really are. But this isn't historical poetry we are reading today. This is a highly rigorous, logical shortcut to being deeply well-informed on the actual objective realities of the universe.
We are going to look the monster directly in the eye.
And that concept of the monster is exactly where the framework begins, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The fundamental premise established right out of the gate is that biblical realism is fiercely true to nature. It never strains a fact.
So it's not exaggerating for dramatic effect.
Exactly. It never, ever glosses over a dark truth for the sake of making the audience comfortable.
And the text points straight to the Apostle Paul to prove this. If you look at 1 Corinthians 15, Paul writes with this majestic, almost soaring eloquence about immortality.
The language is just beautiful.
It is. But even in his absolute highest flights of rhetoric, he doesn't laugh at death.
No, he doesn't mock it as if it's powerless.
Right. He doesn't adopt this breezy, modern attitude of, oh, dying is just a transition. It's just passing on to the next room.
Yeah, that kind of gentle Hallmark card approach.
Exactly. No, Paul depicts death as a dragon. He depicts it as an inescapable monster standing directly in the middle of your path.
The realism there is absolutely critical. I mean, if you diminish the horror of the enemy, you inherently diminish the magnitude of the victory.
Wow, that's a really good point.
The argument here is that this dragon is stationed at an iron gate. There is no detour. There is no bridge over this river.
No way around it for anybody.
None. Every single human being, regardless of their wealth, their theology, or their modern medical interventions, must eventually walk up to that iron gate.
And they have to face the dragon entirely alone. Like no one can cross it for you.
which introduces a massive strategic pivot in the text.
Right. The logic here insists that we cannot slay this monster. We can't crush its head. The combat is 100% unavoidable.
We have to fight it.
Yes, but our strategy, if we can even use that word, isn't to kill death. Our strategy is to extract its sting.
Exactly, and that distinction is paramount to the entire theological framework. The text says, "Thou canst not slay it, man, but thou mayest pull out the sting, which is deadly."
Pull out the sting. So you can't avoid the physical cessation of your biological functions.
No, you cannot stop the dragon from arriving at your doorstep.
But there is a massive legal and spiritual difference between facing a fully armed, venomous dragon and facing a dragon that has been utterly disarmed.
A huge difference.
Hold on, though. I have a real problem with this diagnostic approach. Like, I get what he's saying, but let's push back a bit.
Sure, go for it.
You're saying we have to stare the dragon in the teeth. You're praising this unflinching realism. But practically speaking, if you tell people they're facing a horrifying, unstoppable monster, aren't you just paralyzing them with fear?
I can see why it feels that way, yeah?
Because we live in an era that tries to soften grief with gentle language.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we celebrate lives, we say people passed away.
We use a lot of euphemisms.
We do. So how is inducing this level of sheer terror a pathway to anything resembling comfort or peace?
Because true peace is impossible without an honest diagnosis. I mean, look at it this way. If you go to an oncologist with a terminal aggressive cancer and they tell you that you just have a minor infection to spare your feelings, they aren't giving you peace.
It's true, they're just lying to you.
Right, they are deluding you. The illusion of safety is not peace.
Okay, I see where you're going.
The text wants to strip away the delusion because a false comfort will shatter the moment you reach the iron gate.
When you actually have to face the dragon.
Exactly. The logic here is that you must fully comprehend the lethality of the bomb before you can appreciate the fact that the bomb squad has defused it.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So once you understand the monster has been disarmed, you don't have to pretend it's a harmless puppy.
Right. You can look the terrifying dragon, acknowledge its horrific nature, and know with absolute legal certainty that it cannot ultimately harm you.
Disarming the monster, as the text beautifully puts it, turns it into a swift-winged angel to waft thee aloft.
The swift-winged angel, that is an unbelievable paradigm shift.
It really is. But to logically bridge that gap, you know, from a venomous dragon to a swift-winged angel, we have to identify what the venom actually is. Like, what gives the dragon its lethal power?
And the text is incredibly surgical here. It says point blank, the sting of death is sin.
The sting of death is sin. Okay, and we really need to parse how the text breaks this down, because it isn't just a generic Sunday school answer.
No, it's highly detailed. It defines the sting in two distinct chronological categories.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, on a macro-historical level, sin is the sting because sin actually brought death into the cosmos as a penal sanction. It's the origin story of the dragon itself.
And the thought experiment the text uses here is fascinating. It asks you to imagine an alternate reality where humanity had never rebelled.
A completely sinless world.
Right. Let's say we lived in perfect obedience. Obviously, the physical world would eventually reach capacity.
Sure, space would run out.
So God would have provided some glorious means of translation from this world to the next.
Like an upgrade, basically.
Exactly. The text points to the biblical examples of Enoch simply being taken up, or Elijah being swept away in a chariot of fire.
Yeah, in a sinless cosmos, departing this biological life wouldn't be a tragedy at all.
It wouldn't involve decay or disease or mourning.
It would be a joyous, triumphant graduation of the soul. The gates to the next reality would be made of pearl and ivory, not cold, heavy, inescapable iron.
I love that image. The phrase used is that the stream of transition would be as nectar, far different from the present bitterness of death.
But because of human rebellion, death doesn't arrive as a graduation.
No, it arrives as an executioner.
Yeah.
It arrives as a penalty.
And because it is inherently a penal consequence, it inherently carries a sting.
Even for the most deeply sanctified believer, right?
Right. Even for them, death casts a dark shadow because of its parentage. It was birthed by treason.
So that establishes the objective historical origin of the sting. But then the text pivots to the deeply subjective psychological reality.
Yes, and this is the second reason sin is the sting. Unforgiven sin makes the prospect of dying psychologically and spiritually terrifying because of the crushing weight of past actions.
Death forces the human mind into a totally unedited, inescapable confrontation with its own history.
And the text gives us these incredibly vivid, haunting portraits to illustrate this guilt.
Yeah, let's look at the first one. The conqueror. Picture a man who has lived entirely for worldly dominance. He's a monarch of the battlefield, like a lifelong warrior.
He's won all the medals, he's taken the territories.
Right. But now he is on his deathbed. And suddenly the banners hanging in his grand hall, the applause of the crowds, the geopolitical power he amassed, none of it can insulate him.
None of it matters anymore.
Instead of his loyal generals, he is surrounded by the ghosts of his past.
The text describes the spirits of widows and orphans, the collateral damage of his ambition crowding around his bed.
It pictures a specific soldier who died in a brutal siege so the conqueror could have a victory parade.
The imagery is so intense. This ghost appears, displaying his bloody wounds, and says, "I gained them in the siege. I waved my sword in triumph. But in hell I lifted up my eyes in torment. Base wretch, thine ambition hurried me thither."
It's chilling. I mean, the conqueror is trapped in his failing body, surrounded by the horrific, eternal consequences of his selfishness.
And what is so vital to understand here is that the physical agony of his organs shutting down isn't what is tormenting him.
Right, the sting isn't leaving his massive estate. The sting is the sudden, blinding realization of objective moral guilt.
And we must translate this to our modern context because, you don't have to be a literal 19th century military general to experience this.
Definitely not. Think of the modern corporate conqueror, the executive who has ruthlessly clawed their way to the top.
Yeah, manipulating data, exploiting their workforce, destroying their competitors.
Exactly. Or even neglecting their own family just to build an empire.
When the noise of the boardrooms and the distraction of the stock tickers fade away in those final hours, the mind is left completely alone in the dark with the brutal reality of its choices.
But see, that military or corporate conqueror is almost too easy of a target, right?
Yeah, it's easy to point the finger at them.
Exactly. It's easy for us to say, well, I haven't slaughtered an army or destroyed a company, so my deathbed won't look like that.
But the text doesn't let us off the hook.
No, it doesn't. It pivots to a far more subtle domestic betrayal. It looks at the pulpit.
Yeah.
It gives us the portrait of the unfaithful minister.
This one clearly hits incredibly close to home for the speaker, given his vocation.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He pictures a highly successful, popular preacher, a man whose eloquence charmed massive crowds.
He was likely respected, published, and celebrated by everyone.
But he was fundamentally unfaithful to the truth.
Right, he chose to preach lofty philosophy and entertaining ideas to keep the crowds happy, instead of preaching the hard, penetrating, necessary truths aimed at human corruption.
He basically traded fidelity for applause. And on his deathbed, the text says he is visited by the souls of his congregation who are now howling at him from hell.
The dialogue the text imagines here is devastating.
Read some of that for us.
One ghost approaches the dying minister and says, "I asked thee the road to heaven, and thou didst say, do such and such good works, and I did them, and am damned, thou didst tell me an untruth."
Wow.
Another ghost cries out that they came to the church desperate for a truth that would burn their soul and break their pride, but the minister merely spoke smooth, incomprehensible words that lulled them into spiritual apathy.
What this highlights is a terrifying theological reality, which is that our sins are not isolated to our own individual ledgers.
No, they have a blast radius.
Exactly. The minister's sin wasn't even a sin of commission, it was a sin of omission. He just didn't say the hard thing.
But that cowardice literally led human souls into eternal ruin.
The psychology of guilt being unpacked here shows that the mind, in its final moments, realizes it cannot escape the gravitational pull of its rebellion against God's order.
And this brings us to one of the most profound etymological insights in the entire document.
Oh, this part, yes.
The text examines the origin of the word remorse.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The linguistic root of remorse literally means to bite.
To bite. It's such a visceral definition.
It is. And the text builds an unbelievable analogy around this. It says that right now, in the daylight of our health and our youth, we dance with our sins.
We play with them as if they're young lions.
Or beautiful azure serpents. We stroke their scales in the noontide sun. They feel harmless to us. They feel like pets.
But in the darkness of the death chamber, they bite.
The young lion you played with has grown its teeth.
The azure serpent you admired injects its venom directly into your veins. That is the exact mechanism of remorse.
The text explicitly calls this remorse the antechamber of the pit. It is the internal, highly subjective psychological experience of objective moral guilt tearing the soul apart from the inside out before eternity even begins.
It's just a horrifying image.
Okay, so if the ghosts of our past sins haunt the deathbed, you'd think that was terrifying enough. But the text argues that the future trajectory of sin is infinitely worse.
And this is where we have to look closely at the Medusa effect and the eternity of human characters.
This is a major philosophical pivot, right?
Yes. Most people, even those well-versed in theology, tend to view sin as a static historical event. Like, it's a bad deed recorded on a heavenly ledger.
Right, like a tally mark.
But this framework argues that sin is profoundly organic. It is agricultural. It operates on the principle of a seed.
It grows from a seed to a blade to the ear and then to the full corn in the ear.
It isn't just an action. It is an active, expanding, consuming force within human nature.
It starts as a fleeting wish, mutates into imagination, hardens into a desire, manifests as a sight, a taste, and finally a deed.
Exactly. And the horrifying realization is that this organic growth doesn't automatically stop just because your heart stops beating.
This is the scary part.
The text argues that at the precise moment of physical death, the fountain of blood and forgiveness is permanently sealed. The scales of justice declare, "He that is filthy, let him be filthy still."
This blew my mind when I read it.
It really reframes everything.
Think about all the things that hold human evil in check right now. Common grace, the prick of conscience, societal laws, the fear of prison, the desire for a good reputation, the preached word of God.
We have all these external and internal guardrails keeping our worst impulses in check.
But at death, every single one of those restraints is removed.
Without those guardrails, the organic seed of sin is allowed to grow completely unchecked. It blazes with tenfold fury eternally.
So the individual continues to grow filthier, more bitter, more rebellious, more consumed by their own vice forever.
This redefines the popular conception of hell. It is not merely an externally imposed torture chamber with pitchforks and fire. It is the unchecked, eternal, accelerated unfolding of the sinner's own corrupt character.
Locked in a state of perpetual momentum without a single drop of grace to slow it down.
And the text explicitly takes time here to philosophically dismantle the idea of short punishment, what theologians call annihilationism.
Right. This is the comforting idea that God will punish a wicked soul for a set amount of time in hell and then just extinguish their existence so they don't have to suffer forever.
Yes, and the argument used to dismantle it is rooted deeply in the metaphysics of time.
How so?
The text references the angel in the book of Revelation who raises his hand and swears that time shall be no longer. This isn't just a poetic phrase, it is a profound ontological shift.
Meaning the nature of reality changes.
Exactly. Annihilationism requires time to exist. It requires a chronological sequence. First, the soul exists, then it is punished for a duration, and then it ceases to be.
Right. If a soul could be snuffed out after 1,000,000 years, time would still exist. You could measure it. There would still be a before and an after.
But the text argues that eternity is not just a really, really long sequence of years. Eternity is a state where the very concept of time ceases to function.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the cessation of time means there is no next chapter.
There is no evolution. There is only an endless, fixed revolution of weal or woe. You are locked in the perpetual now.
The cessation of time means an endless, fixed revolution of weal or woe. This is exactly where the Medusa analogy comes in, isn't it?
It is. The text compares the hour of death to stepping in front of that mythological severed head. Because time stops, your spiritual trajectory is instantly frozen in whatever posture it held.
Where death leaves me, judgment finds me. As I die, so shall I live eternally. Your spiritual character is completely calcified.
If your heart is fundamentally bent toward self-worship, toward bitterness, toward a rejection of divine authority in this life, death simply cements that posture into stone.
And it strips away the polite society that masked it.
You become an eternal, immovable monument to your own chosen rebellion.
So the dragon's sting sin is deadly, not merely because it haunts us with a highlight reel of our past failures, but because it permanently locks us into an eternal, relentlessly escalating future. But this permanent freezing of guilt raises a massive structural question. What gives sin this unbreakable, eternal power? Like, why can't a loving God just look down, wave a cosmic magic wand, and say, you know what, don't worry about it, let's just wipe the slate clean?
This is where we hit the bedrock of Reformed thought. The text anchors this in the biblical axiom, the strength of sin is the law.
The strength of sin is the law.
Yes. This completely shatters the popular sentimental view of religion that dominates so much of our culture today.
Oh, for sure. The sentimental view says that sin is basically venial. It's a minor infraction like a parking ticket.
Right. We think, yeah, I've sinned, but I'm basically a good person. I'll try to be better. And God is mostly a grandfatherly figure who just wants to be merciful.
The text destroys that illusion by rigorously defining the true nature of God's law.
It starts with the spirituality of the law. The law does not merely govern overt, physical, measurable
It
actions.
reaches into the invisible, microscopic depths of the human heart.
It governs thoughts, affections, motives, and desires.
Like, thou shalt not covet is entirely a crime of the mind.
You can break that law while sitting perfectly still in an empty room.
The law criminalizes lust, unjust anger, selfish ambition, and pride long before they ever produce a physical action. The inward workings of the mind are held to a standard of absolute, blinding purity.
Therefore, the idea of a fallen human living a sinless life isn't just difficult, it is a mathematical and legal impossibility.
And it isn't just that the law is spiritual in its scope. It is unimaginably severe in its demand. It demands absolute, uninterrupted perfection.
The text says you must be as pure and as immaculate as Jesus. The law cannot and will not abate a single tittle. It will not grade on a curve.
The text introduces this staggering personification, the court of blind justice. Picture justice standing there blindfolded, holding the cosmic scales.
For every single infraction, every impure thought, every selfish motive, every omission of duty, she drops a heavy iron weight onto one side of the scale.
And the human sinner stands there, realizing the impossibility of the weight, and starts begging for leniency.
Can't you just forget that one? Can't you just cast it away? Be merciful.
And justice gives this terrifying, unwavering reply. She says, I will not have mercy. Mercy has its own palace, but I have naught to do with forgiveness here. I stand here alone without her.
Justice only deals in exact proportional penalties. Sin die, transgress, be chastised.
This raises an important question, though. The text is aggressively separating justice and mercy into distinct, non-overlapping operations within the character of God.
Yes, it is.
Why? Why can't they just blend together?
Because the text is masterfully explaining the precise legal mechanics of why an atonement is absolutely necessary. God cannot simply forgive and forget by ignoring his own law because God is justice.
To suspend his justice would be to violate his own nature.
Exactly. He would cease to be God. Think of a human courtroom.
Yeah, go.
If a judge let a serial killer walk free just because the killer cried and said, I'm really sorry, I'll do better, we wouldn't praise that judge for being merciful.
No, we would be outraged.
We would demand he be removed from the bench for being utterly corrupt. The moral fabric of the universe demands that crimes are paid for.
And God is not a corrupt judge.
His justice must be entirely, precisely satisfied to the last decimal point.
Which exposes the sheer, laughable absurdity of a human being trying to satisfy this kind of law through their own good works or religious rituals.
The text uses these brilliant, slightly mocking metaphors here.
It says, relying on your own good deeds to satisfy the law is like trying to twist a rope out of dry sand.
She just slips through your fingers.
Or building a massive pyramid out of thin air. Or constructing a fortress out of bubbles and actually believing it's going to protect you from a siege.
Your own righteousness is utterly, comically useless against the adamantine chains of the law.
The strength of sin is the law. Because the law cannot be bent, broken, or bribed, the penalty for sin cannot simply be waved away by divine fiat.
Sin and the law are linked together with unbreakable, eternal chains.
If you insist on standing before the scales of justice on your own merit, justice will gladly accommodate your request. She will evaluate your life, but she will exact the utmost jot and tittle of your infinite debt.
So let's summarize the battlefield we're on right now.
Yeah, let's reset. We are facing a dragon with a lethal venom called sin. That sin isn't just haunting our past, it is permanently freezing our eternal future.
And the power that gives this venom its unbreakable grip is the eternal, uncompromising force of a perfectly righteous law that demands our execution.
It seems like a completely airtight, hopeless scenario.
There is no loophole.
But that leads us directly to the mechanism of triumph. We have to talk about the substitute.
This is where the theological synthesis of the text reaches its absolute peak. How do you defeat a law that cannot be broken?
By fulfilling it perfectly. Christ removes the strength of sin by doing the one specific thing humanity could never do, entirely satisfying the demands of the law.
The text notes that because of this exact mechanism, believers are legally no longer under the law. They are transferred to a new jurisdiction. They are under grace.
And the psychological difference between the two is massive, isn't it?
Oh, it changes everything. Being under the law means your fundamental operating principle is terror, do this, or be punished eternally.
Right. Being under grace means your operating principle is overwhelming gratitude. God did so much for me. What ought I to do for him out of love?
The motivation completely changes because the legal standing has changed. But we have to dig into how Christ secured this change.
He doesn't just offer amnesty. He acts as the substitute. And in Reformed theology, this substitution has two distinct, necessary parts, active and passive obedience.
Yes. Let's break those down. Christ walks up to the scales of justice. First, he offers his perfectly spotless, completely flawless life.
That's the act of righteousness.
Exactly.
Right.
And he imputes it, or legally credits it, to the believer. He says, "Find a fault in this man. I have put my spotless robe upon him."
And then comes the passive obedience. On the cross, he willingly steps onto the other side of the scale and absorbs the infinite, exact penalty that the believer's sin demanded.
There is this one line quoted in the text that is just raw, majestic poetry. "At one tremendous draught of love, I have drunk that man's destruction dry."
He didn't just take a sip of the cup of God's wrath. He drank it down to the very dregs so that there isn't a single microscopic drop left for the believer to face.
And here is the absolute genius of the legal mechanics of this victory.
That's that.
The text points out that justice is actually more satisfied, and the law is more highly honored by the substitute's perfect righteousness than if the sinner had somehow managed to bring their own flawed attempts at goodness.
That is profound.
The majesty of the law is infinitely vindicated because the eternal Son of God himself respected it enough to pay its price.
The adamantine chains of the law aren't shattered by some chaotic brute force. They're unlocked with the precise key of perfect legal satisfaction.
Which leads us to what has to be the most epic, audacious imagery in the entire manuscript, the triumphant descent.
Picture this. The believer, completely wrapped in this perfect, impenetrable robe of the substitute's righteousness, walks boldly down to the gates of death.
They're actually walking past the dungeons of the underworld, where the fiends and demons are kept in iron fetters.
The demons are growling. They're hissing in the shadows, biting at their iron bonds, desperate to reach out, accuse, and destroy the passing believer.
But they're completely paralyzed.
Because the believer literally turns and taunts them. The believer looks into the darkness of the pit and shouts, "Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect?"
It is the soaring theology of Romans 8 coming to life in vivid color.
So what does this all mean? It means the believer isn't just barely sneaking past death, hoping God doesn't notice their flaws.
They aren't escaping by the skin of their teeth.
They're walking through the underworld with absolute, audacious, swaggering confidence, practically taunting their spiritual accusers because their substitute has rendered every single legal accusation null and void.
Because the law is completely, exhaustively satisfied, sin no longer has any legal strength. Therefore, the dragon of death simply drops its sting.
It is a monster with no teeth.
It can physically end your biological life, but it cannot touch your soul. When the believer finally reaches the gates of heaven, faith shouts the challenge again, "Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect?"
And the voice from the throne room answers, "Not Christ, for he hath died, not God, for he hath justified."
It's breathtaking. The architecture of this text is stunning.
It builds this massive, terrifying, unscalable wall of inescapable justice, and then reveals how Christ legally dismantles it from the inside out.
And this is crucial. The text doesn't just leave us sitting in a theater clapping at a brilliant theological performance.
Right. It turns the entire crushing weight of this reality outward, directly onto the listener.
Exactly. Up until this point, the framework has been describing objective cosmic realities. Now it demands a deeply personal, immediate accounting.
It turns directly to the audience, and by extension to you, the listener right now, and asks the most piercing, uncomfortable question imaginable.
Are you prepared to die?
The text tells the audience to perform a physical act of self-examination. It says, place one hand on your beating heart, and place your other hand on the Bible, and see if they are in agreement.
Have you truly renounced the illusion of your own righteousness?
Have you stopped trying to build a fortress out of bubbles?
Are you trusting completely, exclusively in the substitute?
The speaker reveals his own heart here. He says he would rather have been the author of the simple, desperate hymn verse, guilty, weak, and helpless worm, on Christ's kind arms I fall, than to have written John Milton's towering epic masterpiece, Paradise Lost.
Let that sink in. To trade all the intellectual glory and literary immortality of Paradise Lost for one simple couplet.
Why? Because that simple verse actually functions as a key to survival. It perfectly captures the true, necessary condition of the believing soul.
It strips away all the pomp, all the intellectual pride, and leaves only dependence on the substitute.
But the speaker knows that a vast portion of his massive audience is not prepared. They are coasting on cultural religion.
And so he anticipates their pushback against his intense, almost uncomfortable earnestness. He knows he's violating the polite clerical rules of his day.
19th century Victorian religion was often very proper, very restrained.
But he refuses to be polite about eternal destruction. He justifies his aggression with the illustration of the burning house.
He says, look, imagine you were sound asleep in your bed, and I knew that the downstairs of your house was entirely engulfed in flames.
Now, you might be totally physically safe for the next 5 minutes. The fire hasn't reached your floor yet.
But if I actually loved you, I wouldn't let you sleep. I wouldn't gently tap on your door and whisper polite suggestions.
I would break the door down, aggressively drag you from your bed, and shout in your face that the flame is directly underneath you.
The pastoral urgency is palpable. He's essentially apologizing for his lack of refinement, while simultaneously insisting that refinement in the face of hell is a form of hatred.
He loves his listeners too much to let them politely sleepwalk into the Medusa's gaze.
And to hammer this reality home, he gives one final staggering illustration, the sword of Damocles.
He pictures the listener sitting at a grand, luxurious feast, much like the ancient tyrant Dionysius.
The cup is overflowing with wine, the worldly pleasures are at their peak, the music is loud and distracting.
But directly over the listener's head, entirely unnoticed by them, is a heavy, razor-sharp, glittering sword suspended by a single, fragile human hair.
It is the ultimate picture of the extreme fragility of biological life, combined with the terrifying imminence of divine justice.
The text argues that even right now, in this very second, God Almighty might be giving the command to the angel Gabriel to unsheathe his blade and cut that single hair.
Let the weapon fall upon him and divide his soul and body.
The contrast the text draws here is almost painfully relevant today.
It points out how a young person might get physically startled by something as trivial as a falling leaf, or how a modern person absolutely hates being alone in silence for even an hour because the quiet brings on melancholy and forces them to think about reality.
We distract ourselves constantly with screens, with noise, with busy work.
But spiritually, the text says we are completely numb to the fact that we are hanging over the pit of eternal fury by a rotting, snapping plank.
But notice carefully how the text masterfully maintains the tension. The speaker has spent an hour preaching these rigorous, terrifying legal realities.
He has threatened the audience with the immediate sword of Gabriel. He has brought them to the very edge of the precipice.
But how does he actually conclude? He concludes with the intercession of the substitute.
Jesus steps in between Gabriel and the sinner and says, "Stop, Gabriel. Put away the sword. Spare him yet another year. Let him not die."
Let me dig about the tree and fertilize it. Maybe it will bring forth fruit. It's the parable of the fig tree.
It is the active intercession of Christ, holding back the sword of absolute justice just long enough to allow a window for repentance.
The text ends with the widest, most incredibly generous open arms imaginable.
After unpacking all the absolute terror of the dragon, the venomous sting of sin, the adamant scales of justice, and the hanging sword, the speaker simply steps back.
And he quotes the expansive invitation of Scripture. "Whosoever believeth on the name of the Lord Jesus Christ shall be saved. Let everyone that heareth say, Come, whosoever is athirst, let him come and take of the water of life freely."
The profound, terrifying mechanics of the law serve only one ultimate purpose: to drive the desperate sinner out of their own illusions and into the open, loving, secure arms of grace.
It really is a masterpiece of theological engineering.
Okay, so synthesizing everything we've covered in this deep dive, the overarching reality is undeniable.
We cannot escape the monster of death. No amount of money, no amount of medical technology, no amount of cultural denial will stop the dragon from meeting us on the path.
But we absolutely do not have to face its sting. If we abandon our own bubble fortresses and hide ourselves completely in the perfect, active, and passive righteousness of the substitute, the scales of the law are satisfied.
The venom is extracted, and the terrifying dragon becomes nothing more than a swift-winged angel carrying us to a realm where time ceases and joy is permanent.
And that cosmic legal reality should profoundly, practically shape how you live today.
As we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over, building directly on that terrifying Medusa analogy we unpacked earlier.
Let's hear it.
If it is true that death freezes our character forever, if eternity is not just a magical change of location, but rather the endless, uninterrupted, unchecked continuation of the exact spiritual trajectory you are on right now, how does that reframe the small, seemingly insignificant habits of thought you entertain?
How does it change the hidden desires you are privately cultivating today?
If all the social restraints were removed right now, and whatever is growing inside you was allowed to blaze with tenfold fury forever, what would that actually look like? Are you currently practicing for the eternity you actually want?
That is a remarkably heavy, necessary question to carry with you. The drywall of our modern distractions cannot protect the sinking foundation forever.
Eventually, time stops, the Medusa looks at you, and we all have to look at the X-ray of our own souls.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Reformed thinking. Until next time, take a hard look at the foundation. Stop trusting in your own righteousness and rest entirely in the substitute.